The Silence That Kills. Part 1. The Letter with No Return Address. Chapter 1. The envelope was thick, yellowed by time, and bore no return address, only her name, written in the same steady hand she hadn't seen in 23 years. Eliza Merriweather stood in the hallway of her quiet seaside cottage in Eastbourne, staring at the letter as if it might catch fire. It was nearly dusk, and the last rays of sun stretched across the parquet floor like golden fingers, trembling slightly with the breeze that whispered through the slightly ajar door. She didn't remember leaving it open. She didn't remember hearing the post arrive either. But there it was. A single envelope. No stamp, no return address, no postmark. Only her name. Mrs. Eliza Merriweather. Neatly penned in black fountain ink. The kind soldiers once used in briefing rooms. The kind she herself had used before she buried that part of her life forever. Chapter 2. She sat down at the kitchen table, the letter resting untouched beside the teapot, Earl Grey, still steaming. Her hands hovered over it, uncertain. It had been over 2 decades since she'd left Whitehall. Since the war ended, and with it, her days of decoding enemy transmissions, sketching maps in darkened rooms, and waiting for men who never returned from behind enemy lines. She was a gardener now, a widow, a woman of quiet mornings and crossword puzzles. And yet, this envelope, this quiet, pale thing carried a weight that didn't belong to this life. She finally opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no name. Only a message typed on a manual typewriter. They are waking up again. What we buried in Lubeck was not alone. You must come. The war is not over. Beneath the message, in faint blue ink, one more line. Room 7 still remembers. Chapter 3. Eliza didn't sleep that night. She tried reading, knitting, even taking a short walk to the shore under the moonlight, but the letter burned in her thoughts, like a match held too long. Room 7. That could only mean one thing. The boarding house. Sainsbury House. She hadn't been there since 1944. It was a half-secret safe house then, disguised as a coastal retreat for wounded airmen, but it held far darker secrets, intercepted transmissions, traitorous guests, and a coded ledger that vanished one night without explanation. And now, someone was calling her back. Chapter 4. Return to Sainsbury House. The road to Sainsbury House had changed little in 20 years. Eliza drove in silence, her hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, eyes flicking to the rear-view mirror every few minutes. Not out of fear, but habit. Old reflexes stirred. She had not worn a seatbelt this tightly since 1945. The guesthouse came into view just after noon. A grand, grey-bricked Victorian estate sitting atop a grassy knoll overlooking the sea. It had the same ivy-covered facade, the same wrought-iron sign that read, Sainsbury House, Est, 1879, and the same crooked chimney that always reminded her of a leaning soldier. But something was different. The curtains were drawn in every window, and the silence, oh, the silence, was deafening. She parked the car on the gravel drive and stepped out, her coat catching the wind. The air smelled of salt and faded history. She climbed the stairs slowly, almost unwillingly, and raised her hand to knock when the door creaked open on its own. Inside stood a woman, middle-aged, sharply dressed, wearing a smile too polite to be real. "Mrs. Merriweather?" the woman asked, though it sounded more like confirmation than question. "Yes," Eliza said, keeping her voice steady. "We've been expecting you." Chapter 5. The Guests Who Never Left. There were 5 guests at Sainsbury House, each stranger than the last. Colonel Fenwick, a retired military man whose medals were outshone only by his silence. Miss Trellis, a widowed schoolteacher with too many books and no photographs. Mr. Doyle, a soft-spoken linguist who stuttered when asked where he'd been during the war. Sister Helena, a nun with haunted eyes and no clear denomination. And lastly, Mr. Calder, the manager, polite, invisible, the kind who speaks only in weather. The dining room was exactly as Eliza remembered: polished oak table, ticking grandfather clock, and a fireplace that hadn't seen fire in a decade. No one asked why she was there. No one introduced themselves. It was as if they were all waiting. That night, Eliza found a second envelope under her bedroom door. Inside, another message, typed in the same machine-written font. He never left the house. You remember what was buried beneath room 7. But do you remember who? Chapter 6. The Room That Was Never Closed. Room 7 was down the west wing hall, second door on the left. Eliza stood before it with a hesitation she didn't fully understand. The door looked no different than it had in 1944 pale green paint, brass handle, nameplate long since faded. But the weight behind it felt heavier now. She turned the knob. Unlocked. The room was cold. Dust lay undisturbed on the vanity. A single iron-framed bed sat in the corner, its mattress neatly made, too neatly. No one had slept here recently. Or perhaps they had, and were very good at hiding it. She walked to the closet, empty. Then to the floorboards near the window. In 1944, this was where they'd hidden the radio. She knelt, pressing gently at the seams. Still loose. When she pulled the panel up, she didn't find wires. She found a cassette tape in a paper sleeve. On it, written in smudged ink, recording. FAB 29 1952. Room 7. Do not play aloud. Her hands trembled. Chapter 7. Echoes from the Machine. Eliza borrowed an old tape player from Mr. Calder. No music? He asked dryly as she passed. Just ghosts, she replied. In her room, with the curtains drawn and the volume low, she pressed play. Click. Whir. Then, voices. 2 men. Muffled, but not unintelligible. You can't trust her, not after Lubeck. She doesn't even remember what she saw. That's exactly why we need her. A pause. Then a third voice. A woman. Calm. Familiar. They buried the wrong one. Eliza stopped the tape. She sat for a long time in silence, staring at her reflection in the vanity mirror, pale, eyes wide, breath shallow. She knew that voice. She hadn't heard it in decades. It was her own. Chapter 8. The Second Voice. Eliza replayed the recording 3 times. Each time she tried to convince herself it wasn't real, that it was spliced, edited, an illusion from a war she had long since tucked away behind gardening gloves and crossword puzzles. But the tone was unmistakable. Her younger voice, measured, cool, as she had been trained. But it wasn't the voice that unsettled her. It was the certainty in it. She sounded like she knew something she no longer remembered. She opened her journal, the one she had kept only for code, operations, and shadows. The last entry was from March 1945. It ended abruptly with a single line. The ledger is blank, but it bleeds. She didn't remember writing that. Later that evening she ventured back into the common lounge, where the guests sat in silence, each sipping tea like it was a sacrament. Colonel Fenwick was reading a book with the cover torn off. Miss Trellis stared out the window, her lips moving silently. Mr. Doyle coughed when Eliza walked past, and Sister Helena did not look up from her knitting. Mr. Calder approached her with a tray. "Your key," he said. "You dropped it." She hadn't, but she took it anyway. There was a folded note beneath it. "Midnight. Basement. Come alone." The red ink still runs. Chapter 9. Beneath the Floorboards. At midnight, Eliza descended the back stairwell. No footsteps followed. No doors creaked behind her. Sainsbury House, in its age, somehow made no sound tonight. The basement was, as she remembered, damp, low-ceilinged, and lined with crates that hadn't been moved in decades. The dust was honest. The silence was not. A single bare bulb swung from the ceiling, and beneath it, a figure waited. He was tall, thin, wrapped in a heavy trench coat, and wore a scarf that obscured the lower half of his face. But when he removed his hat, Eliza gasped. "Francis?" He nodded once. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Francis Dorian had been her handler during the war. She had believed him dead since Lübeck. "They told me you were shot in Hamburg," she whispered. "They told me a lot of things, too," he replied. He led her to a corner where a rug covered the floorboards. He pulled it aside, revealing a square panel she had never seen before, cut precisely, sealed by iron latches. He knelt, lifted it open, and withdrew something wrapped in oilskin, a book, sealed with twine. Eliza recognized it before he spoke. The red ledger. "Unmarked," he said, "but not empty. It records transmissions that were never sent, intercepted thoughts. Echoes. That's impossible." Francis looked at her. So was surviving Lübeck. Deep Creek echoed above them. They weren't alone anymore. Chapter 10. The letter, with no return address. They froze. Eliza pressed her back to the cold brick wall, eyes on the stairwell. Footsteps echoed from above, slow, deliberate, too careful for a wandering guest. Francis flicked the light off, plunging the basement into shadow. Whoever it was, they knew the house. After several long minutes, the footsteps retreated. Francis turned to her. "They know you're here." "They sent the letter," Eliza whispered. He shook his head. "No, not them. You did." She blinked. "What are you talking about?" He handed her another envelope, yellowed, identical to the first. Same black ink, same name. But this one was torn at the corner. She looked at the writing more closely. The slant, the pressure, the subtle tremor in the M. It was her handwriting. "I found this in Sainsbury's archives last week," Francis said. "Sealed with your name, written by you. Dated 1950. 2. But I never." "That's what we thought. Until we checked room 7. Eliza's throat dried. "What's in room 7? Francis's eyes locked on hers. "You are." Part 2. The Names That Fade. Chapter 1. Ghost in the Ledger. Eliza stood in the hallway of Sainsbury House, the envelope in her hand trembling slightly. Her own handwriting. Her name. But no memory of ever writing it. She stared at Francis. His face was grim, shadowed by the low light of the basement bulb still swinging faintly above. "You think I wrote this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Francis didn't answer right away. Instead, he pointed to the oilskin bundle of the red ledger. "Open it," he said. She hesitated, then untied the string. Inside, the pages were thick, stained, some brittle with time. But there were words, written in red ink. Dozens of names. And next to each one, a date. And next to the date, a single initial. Some had M. Some had N. Some had both. "Eliza?" Francis leaned closer, voice low. "Your name is in here." She flipped the pages faster. March 1000, 945. Her name. Beside it, E. Merriweather, March 2, N. M. Uncertain. Even in the records. She didn't know what it meant. Neither did they. Her legs weakened, and she sat on the basement steps. "What does this mean?" she asked. Francis looked at her. Then said something she hadn't heard in 20 years. "We thought there were only 2, N and M. But what if there was a third?" Chapter 2. The Room with 2 Keys. The next morning, Eliza found the house too quiet, even for Sainsbury. The usual clatter of dishes was missing. No faint cough from Mr. Doyle. No hum from Miss Trellis's endless readings. Only silence. Thick, watchful. She walked past room 7, her hand brushing the doorframe. Still cold. Still sealed in memory. Then she noticed something strange. Room 9 was slightly ajar. It hadn't been the night before. She pushed the door gently. The hinges groaned. Inside, the room was tidy, untouched. But on the desk lay 2 keys. Identical. Brass. Unlabeled. And next to them, a sheet of paper. Typed. 1 key opens truth. The other unlocks memory. Choose carefully, or choose both. But know that names fade. She picked up 1 key. It felt warm, as if someone had held it recently. The second key was cold, heavy, and just then the floorboard beneath her creaked. Not from her weight, from beneath the room. Sanya khe rung, Elisa quiswang, lange, moting thitham, mot kai tin, vang len nu vang tu longdat, hongron, hongquen, nyang lam timba sit chat. Eliza. Chapter 3. The Whisper Map. That night, Eliza waited until the house was asleep. She wrapped the 2 keys in a scarf and carried a candle down the west hall. Room 9 had shifted somehow. The air was colder, the shadows longer. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, quietly. On the desk, where the note had been, something else now lay. A map, hand-drawn, faded, and pulsing, somehow, with memory. Eliza unfolded it slowly. It was the old floor plan of Sainsbury House, but this version showed hidden rooms, secret stairwells, false walls, and a chamber that didn't exist anymore. A red circle had been drawn under the west wing. Beneath, room 7. Beneath everything. Suddenly, the candle flickered. A sound, a whisper, close to her ear, but not spoken aloud. Follow the names. She turned. No one there, but in the mirror across the room, a reflection remained. Not her own. It was a younger woman, wearing Eliza's old uniform, and she was crying. Chapter 4. The Chamber That Vanished. By morning, the map was gone. Eliza had placed it in her drawer, beneath her gloves, and a fading photograph of her and Arthur in Vienna, 1941. But when she opened the drawer again only, the gloves remained. She didn't panic. She felt the pattern now. The house was responding, reacting, testing her memory. The names were fading not from history, but from her. Downstairs, breakfast had resumed. Miss Trellis poured tea. Sister Helena spoke softly to the fireplace. Colonel Fenwick stared at the wall, as if decoding a war he still hadn't won. No one looked at Eliza when she entered, except Francis. He stood by the piano, tapping 1 key in slow rhythm. "Eliza," he said quietly, "there's something under the garden." She blinked. "The garden?" He nodded. "Where the roses used to be." "They're still there," she said. Francis looked her dead in the eye. "No, they were never planted." That afternoon she took a trowel, kneeled by the roses, dug gently, and just beneath the root stew, shallow for coincidences, hit metal. A latch. She pulled. It creaked open. A cold breath of air rose up from below. A hidden staircase, descending into stone. The chamber that wasn't on any modern plan. The one even she had forgotten existed. "You must go alone," Francis had said. "Memories are only loyal to the ones who made them." Chapter 5. The Man Who Wasn't There. The staircase was steep, narrow, cut into stone. Each step echoed, but the echo didn't match her pace. Something someone else was remembering. At the bottom, a rusted door. No handle. Only a circle scratched into the metal. Inside, the chamber was small. Dust choked the corners. A single light bulb swung from the ceiling but didn't turn on. She lit her torch, and gasped. In the center stood a chair. A single chair. Straps on the arms. A tray beside it, with vials empty, but labeled Protocol E7. Memory Extraction. She stepped closer, and thereon the wallet in fading ink and scratches. I remember her, but she does not remember me. Underneath it, F.D. Her breath caught. Francis Dorian. He had been here. He had written this. But she turned, sensing movement, and there, in the corner, stood a man. Thin, still, shadowed. "Francis?" she asked, voice cracking. He didn't move. She reached for the light switch, clicked it. The bulb lit dim, yellow, but the man was gone. Only the chair remained, and the whispers returned. The names fade. Eliza. But they were never yours to keep. Chapter 6. The Shadow Signature. Eliza sat on the edge of the old chair. It creaked beneath her. Leather cracked, dust rising like breath from a sleeping mouth. She looked again at the vials on the tray. All empty. All labelled. But one label stood out faded but just legible. L.M. Her initials. But the writing wasn't hers. She picked up the vial. It was sealed with wax. Inside, a scrap of paper, curled and yellow. With shaking fingers, she cracked it open. On the scrap was a single phrase, written in red. You signed what you forgot. Upstairs, the day grew colder. Snow whispered against the windows. Too early for the season. And still, the fire in the main room remained unlit. Eliza climbed back to the parlour where Francis waited. I saw your mark, she said. He nodded. Then you know. No, she whispered. But I'm beginning to remember that I don't remember. He handed her another envelope. Same paper, same ink. Inside, a photograph. Black and white. A group of people in front of Sansbury House. One woman at the centre. Smiling, confident, young. It was her. But across the back of the photo someone had written, Do not trust her. Even she doesn't know who she is. Chapter 7. The Names That Fade. That night, Eliza dreamed in fragments. Flashes of light. A codebook open on a desk. A hand trembling as it signed a document. A woman's voice whispering her name, but not like a friend. Like a warning. She awoke before dawn, cold sweat clinging to her skin. The photograph lay on the nightstand, face down. She flipped it again, studying each face. One man in the back row, eyes obscured by shadow, felt oddly familiar. She traced his silhouette with her finger. Who are you? She whispered. She returned to the red ledger, turned to the final pages. Blank. But when she held them near the candlelight, faint ink began to bleed through. Invisible ink. And slowly, words emerged. Names fade by design. Those who remember them become dangerous. And then, lower down, you remembered one once. His name began with M. A sharp knock broke her trance. She turned. Francis stood at the door, his face pale, his voice low. Eliza, one of the guests is gone. Gone? He nodded. Room 4, empty bed, no trace. She stood, spine straightening instinctively. What was his name? Francis hesitated, then spoke softly. We don't know. He never signed the ledger. Chapter 8. The one who signed nothing. Room 4 was spotless. Not just clean erased. No clothing. No books. No toothbrush by the sink. Even the imprint on the pillow was gone. It was as if he had never existed. Eliza walked slowly through the room, every instinct on alert. She checked beneath the bed, the wardrobe, behind the curtain. Nothing. Except, inside the desk drawer, wedged behind the back panel, she found a torn envelope. It bore no name. Only a single typed line. He never signed. But she did. She returned to the parlour where Francis waited. Did anyone see him leave? She asked. No one saw anything, he replied. She looked toward the others, Miss Trellis, Sister Helena, Mr. Doyle. They avoided her gaze. They're afraid, she murmured. No, Francis said. They're forgetting. That night, she stood before the old guest book in the main hallway. Her finger traced the names. Ink faded. Some nearly vanished. And then she found it. A signature. In red ink. Not black. Slanted. Familiar. E. Merriweather. Room 7. Below it, a smudge. Another name once written, now scratched away, but barely visible beneath the damage. M. She froze. Outside, snow began to fall. Inside, the fire finally lit itself. Chapter 9. The Fire That Remembers. Eliza sat by the fire. She hadn't lit it. No one had. Yet the flames danced gently, casting long shadows across the room. She watched them in silence, letting the warmth settle into her bones, and the flicker settle into her thoughts. Then she noticed something strange. The fire wasn't orange. It was red, deep red, like the ink in the ledger, like the name on the envelope, like the signature beneath her own. She leaned closer, and then she heard it. Voices whispering within the fire. She was the key, but someone else turned the lock. A figure appeared in the flamier silhouette. A man. Facing her, he raised a hand, palm open, as if begging her to remember. M, the fire breathed. He signed nothing, but he knew everything. Eliza. She turned sharply. Francis stood in the doorway. He looked older, tired. They found another name, he said, in the ash from room 4's fireplace. He held out a slip of paper, half burnt, edges curling. On it, the one you trusted most, never told you the truth. Eliza's eyes met his. Who was he? Francis hesitated. Then, we only knew him as the listener. Chapter 10. The Names That Fade. The wind howled that night. Not like weather, like memory. It scraped across the windows of Sainsbury House, whispering names only Eliza could almost hear. She stood once more before the ledger. This time, she brought a candle. She turned each page slowly. The ink faded more with each turn. By the final page, only one word remained. Burnt into the paper. Not written. Not signed. Just one word. Remember. She walked to room 7, closed the door behind her, sat at the old desk, and opened a blank sheet of paper. She held the red pen Francis had left her, and she began to write. Not a confession, not a letter, a name. But as she wrote it, the letters shifted. The lines blurred. The ink vanished before it dried. It wouldn't let her, because the house, the war, the silence, still wanted her to forget. Behind her, a knock at the door. Not loud, just familiar. She opened it. No one was there. Only a shadow in the hall, turning the corner. And a final note, placed on the floor. Part 3 will begin when you finally speak the name you erased. Part 3. The Listener's Game. Chapter 1. The rules were never written. The sun did not rise. Or perhaps it did, and simply chose not to shine on Sainsbury House that morning. Eliza stood at the window, teacup in hand, untouched. The name she had tried to write the night before had vanished, even from memory. She whispered it over and over again, or thought she did, but it never made it to her lips. The house had taken it back. Downstairs, Francis waited at the hearth. There was no fire this morning. Instead, on the mantel, someone had placed an envelope. It was black, unsealed. Inside, no letter. Only a card, heavy, matte. On one side, a symbol, a spiral drawn in ink, ending in a dot. On the other, welcome to the listener's game. One of you knows the answer. One of you has already spoken. One of you will disappear before midnight. Francis handed it to her without a word. Eliza turned the card over in her hand. Who started this? She asked. He met her eyes. I think we did. Chapter 2. The voice behind the wall. The house shifted again. Eliza could feel it, the subtle warping of space. The hallway seemed longer, the corners darker. She walked past room 2, then room 5, and then room 2 again. Impossible. She stopped, listened, and there, faint, but clear, a voice behind the wall. She heard him, but she did not listen. It was a man's voice, gentle, calculated, calm like a doctor just before the diagnosis. Eliza pressed her ear to the wallpaper. The voice continued. He told her everything, in silence. She backed away, and there, on the wall, words began to bleed through the floral print. Faint, as if etched with water instead of ink. Only listeners survived the game. She ran to the parlour. Francis was no longer there. Only Miss Trellis now, knitting, humming an old wartime lullaby. Eliza approached slowly. "Have you seen Francis?" Miss Trellis didn't look up, but she spoke, and when she did, her voice was not her own. "You've already lost one round, Eliza, and you only have 2 left." The atmosphere was heavy as molten iron. Sainsbury House now was not just a place of darkness, but a living game board. Chapter 3. The Listening Room. The door appeared after sunset. Not before. Not after. Exactly as the clock struck 6. A hallway that used to end in brick now continued for 5 steps, and ended in an unfamiliar door. It was painted deep navy blue. No knob. Only a bronze plate engraved with one word. Listen. Eliza stood before it. Behind her, the corridor was silent. In front of her, the air hummed faintly, like electricity or a heartbeat trapped in the wall. She reached for the door, and it opened, on its own. Inside was a small room, circular, padded walls, a single chair in the center, facing a reel-to-reel recorder that had already begun to spin. She stepped inside. The door shut behind her. The tape clicked and began to play. Eliza Merriweather. "This is your voice, but not your memory." She froze. "Do you remember the safe house in Vienna?" Her knees weakened. "Yes." "Do you remember the man who gave you the wrong name?" "Yes." "Do you remember forgiving him?" Silence. Then, "You shouldn't have." The tape hissed, and a final whisper came through. "He is still here. But now, he listens better than you do." Chapter 4. The game's first victim. Eliza burst from the listening room, gasping. The door vanished behind her. The hallway was still but colder. The lamps flickered one by one, like eyes blinking in fear. At the end of the hall, voices. Muffled. Urgent? She ran. In the parlour, the guests had gathered. Francis stood in silence. Miss Trellis wept softly in the corner. Sister Helena stared at the grandfather clock, unmoving. And on the settee, Mr. Doyle, still, eyes open, not breathing. Eliza knelt beside him, checked his pulse. Cold. On the floor beneath his hand, a small black token. Flat, round, etched with a spiral, just like the card. One word scratched on its edge. "Listened," Francis whispered. "He was the quietest of us." "No," Eliza said. "He was the one who never asked questions." She turned to the group. "This isn't random. The listener's game someone is pulling the strings." Miss Trellis looked up, and for a moment, just a moment, the eyes weren't hers. They were someone else's. Watching, remembering. The grandfather clock struck 7. Another round had begun, and the house held its breath. Chapter 5. The rule no one spoke. The parlour remained silent long after Mr. Doyle's body was taken away. There was no doctor to call. No police. Not in Sainsbury House. Not in this game. Eliza stood near the fireplace, arms folded tightly. "I need answers," she said. Francis nodded slowly. So do I. But we may not like them. He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a slip of paper. Old, creased. It had been torn from a playbook. A children's game? No. The listener's game. Rules. Only one rule was legible. Do not speak a name unless you're ready to forget it. What does it mean? She asked. Frances met her eyes. I think it's why you can't remember his name. Eliza's hand trembled. Then why can I still remember yours? He gave her a look so full of sadness it could break steel. You may not for long. The clock struck 8, and Eliza noticed the spiral token was gone from the settee. In its place, a mirror, framed in black wood. Carved at the top, the words, "Now it's your turn," and her own reflection blinked. Before she did, Chapter 6. The Mirror That Lies. Eliza stared into the mirror, but what she saw wasn't quite her. Same hair, same eyes, but older, worn, as if the reflection had lived more than she had. And then it spoke, not aloud. Inside her, you gave him the name. You broke the first rule. You let him in. She stepped back. The mirror didn't. Her reflection stayed frozen watching. Accusing. Behind her, footsteps. Frances. Eliza, it's time. She turned, shaken. For what? He handed her a second spiral token, etched with a time, 9:0 p.m., and one word. Choose. In the dining hall, 3 chairs were set. Only 2 had names carved into the backs. Frances. Eliza. The third was blank. Eliza, Frances said, the mirror gave you a choice. She looked down. Another note waited on the table. In thin black ink, say one name. Remember one truth. Lose one player. The game was no longer listening. It was waiting. Chapter 7. The name she chose. Eliza stared at the blank third chair. Who was meant to sit there? And why hadn't they shown up? Frances waited, unmoving, as the grandfather clock ticked toward 9. The token in her palm grew warm. The spiral shimmered faintly in the firelight. Say one name, but names were dangerous here. They were doors. Speak the wrong one, and you forgot. Speak the right one, and someone else disappeared. Her mind raced. Arthur? Nohe was gone. Frances? No, not yet. Then it came to her. Not a name she loved, not a name she feared, but a name she had buried. Deep. She spoke it. Helena. Silence. Then, the third chair burst into flame. The token in her hand cracked, and from down the hall, a scream. Sister Helena collapsed in the hallway. No blood. No injury. Just silence. Unmoving. Eliza ran to her, but it was too late. The whisper came from everywhere. You chose well. One more must fall before midnight. The game wasn't over. It had just learned her voice. Chapter 8. The Listener Answers Back. Eliza stood over Helena's silent body, her breath shallow, her heart louder than her thoughts. Frances approached slowly. She knew something, he said quietly, but she would never say it out loud. Eliza turned toward him. Maybe that's why the listener spared her so long. Frances handed her another slip of paper, folded, still warm. This one had no words, just a single fingerprint, pressed in black ink. Where did you get this? She asked. I didn't, he said. It found me. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching shadows move in places no one walked. Then, at midnight, the tape recorder in the listening room clicked on. She ran. The room welcomed her this time. Lit. Chair waiting. Recorder spinning. And a new voice came through. You've asked enough questions, Eliza. It was her voice. But younger. Colder. Now it's time to listen. The reel crackled. Then continued, Do you remember the document you signed in Vienna? She nodded, trembling. Do you remember who watched you do it? She closed her eyes. He's still watching. And then, for the first time, the listener spoke. Eliza, you've been telling the story wrong. Chapter 9. The story she never told. The tape spun slower now. Eliza leaned in, heart pounding with each turn. This story isn't about what you forgot, the listener whispered. It's about what you refused to remember. She sat back. No air left in the room. Only static and memory. Vienna. Winter. The old cathedral basement. Candlelight flickering off the faces of 5 agents. One of them, Eliza. The youngest. The brightest. The one who volunteered. They handed her the document. The pen. The glass of water after. It's just protocol, they said. But when she signed her name, the paper didn't take the ink. Instead, the letters shifted, bled, rewrote themselves. Eliza Merriweather, asset, undeclared listener. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't signed a mission. She'd signed a role she didn't understand, a role she had never escaped. Back in Sainsbury House, she whispered to herself, "That's why I hear them. That's why the names fade. Because I was never meant to remember." And then the final message on the tape. You are not playing the listener's game, Eliza. You are the listener. Chapter 10. The listener's game ends at midnight. The house held its breath. So did Eliza. Midnight loomed outside the frostbitten windows. Inside, every candle flickered as if afraid. She returned to the parlour. Frances was waiting. So was the mirror. This time, her reflection smiled first. "You've always known," Frances said quietly. She looked at him. His voice was too steady, too rehearsed. "You were never a guest here," he continued. "You were the anchor." She stepped back. "Anchor?" He nodded. "The listener cannot leave the game, unless she names herself." The mirror shimmered. The words appeared once more. "Say your name." Her hands trembled. Eliza looked into her reflection. Behind its shadows. The memories she had buried. The names she'd forgotten. The choices she never made. And she said it. Not the name the world knew. Not the one she'd signed in Vienna, but the one they gave her, the day she became a weapon. I am Echo. The house exhaled. The fire roared. Frances vanished. So did the mirror. So did the spiral. Only her voice remained. And it was hers again. Part 4. Echoes of the War Room. Chapter 1. The Room Without Walls. Eliza woke before dawn. Not in her bed. Not in Sainsbury House. But on a bench. In a station. Abandoned. Fog curled at her feet. A single street lamp flickered above. In her coat pocket, a brass token. Not spiral. Not mirror. A seal. Worn. Engraved with a lion and a crown. And beneath it, 3 words. War Room Echo. She stood slowly. Across the street, an old building loomed behind rusted gates. Steel shutters. Brick walls, blackened by time. No signs. No lights. No guards. But the front door stood open, waiting. Inside, the smell of burnt paper and cold stone. Desks, typewriters, maps long peeled from the walls. And in the center of the room, a single chair facing a blank projector screen. She approached it cautiously. On the chair, a dossier, labeled Operation Silent Anchor, and taped to its cover, a photograph. Old. Faded. 5 agents. 1 woman, unsmiling, in the center. Eliza. A voice echoed from the intercom. Crackled. Familiar. "Welcome back, Agent Echo. We've been expecting your testimony." Chapter 2. The film that was never played. Eliza sat in the chair. The dossier felt heavier than its size allowed, like it contained not pages but years. The projector clicked on. The screen flickered. Then came a voice. For internal use only. Clearance. Level echo. She exhaled slowly. The first frame appeared. A corridor. Marble floors. British flags. Men and women in tailored coats walking with urgency. The caption, London, War Cabinet Archives, 1942. Then another frame. A door, heavily locked, numbered 73. And behind it, darkness. The screen flickered again. Then came a clip. Silent. Black and white. Eliza appeared on screen. Younger. Stern. Sitting at a round table with 4 other agents. A man leaned forward, speaking, but the film had no sound. Only his lips moving. But Eliza remembered the line. If this mission fails, Britain won't fall to bullets. It'll fall to silence. Then, the screen cut to black. And one final message appeared in red. One of the 5 at this table betrayed you. You must remember who. The film jammed. The projector smoked. And in the back of the room, a door she hadn't noticed creaked open. Chapter 3. The door that led backward. Eliza stepped toward the open door. No draft. No sound. Just the scent of old perfume. And something metallic. It wasn't in the blueprints of the war room, because it had never been official. She stepped through. The hallway beyond was narrow, lit by a single strip of yellow light, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Each step echoed. The walls were lined with files. Not shelves, not drawers. Just loose files pinned directly to the wall. Names, photos, fingerprints, dates. And beneath each one, 2 boxes. Loyal. Listener. She scanned the faces. Some forgotten. Some still breathing in Parliament. Some dead. But one file had no boxes. Just her photo. Underneath it, a red stamp. Unfiled. The hallway ended at a steel door marked Echo Chamber. But when she pushed it open, she found no chamber. Just a memory. Her own voice, playing on loop. I remember the silence. I remember his hands. I remember the lie. And then a second voice, louder. Then, why haven't you written it down? In the middle of the floor, a typewriter. Loaded. The keys were warm, and the paper was blank, but trembling. Chapter 4. The sentence she wasn't allowed to write. Eliza sat at the typewriter. It greeted her with a mechanical hum, low, steady, almost comforting, like an old comrade she no longer trusted. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She closed her eyes, and whispered the sentence she never dared speak aloud. The betrayal was authorized. Her fingers began to type. Each keystroke rang louder than the last. T, H, E, B, E, T, R, A, Y, A, L, W, A, S, A, U, T. Click. The key jammed. She pulled her hand back. Blood. The letter H had sliced her skin. Not a malfunction. A warning. Some words aren't yours to write, said a voice behind her. She turned sharply. No one. Only a mirror. The one from Sainsbury House. But now it reflected someone else. A man in uniform. Grey eyes. And the same spiral badge on his lapel. He lifted a finger and pointed at her. Then at the typewriter. And finally, at the ceiling. Eliza looked up. A sentence was being projected across the concrete. Who writes the story? Owns the silence. Chapter 5. The page that was already typed. Eliza reached for the paper still in the typewriter. But when she pulled it free, her typed sentence was gone. In its placelines she never wrote, Agent Echo. Declared compromised. Subject reclassified. Information hazard. All memories subject to audit. She read it again. And again. The ink didn't smudge. It wasn't fresh. This page had been typed before she sat down. A soft, mechanical sound filled the room. Another paper emerged from the typewriter on its own. She snatched it. This one bore a name, Francis Hawthorne. Status, redacted. Threat level, unknown. She stepped back. No, she whispered. That's not possible. She turned to the mirror. Her reflection mouthed a single word. Run. Behind her, the door slammed shut. Lights snapped off. Only the glowing paper in her hand remained, and the sound of footsteps. Heavy, rhythmic, getting closer. Chapter 6. The Redacted Man. The footsteps grew louder, measured, military, inevitable. Eliza backed away from the door, but there was no escape. Just walls filled with files, and shadows that moved when she didn't. The door burst open, and there he stood, tall, trim, a silhouette in grey, face obscured, lapel pin, spiral, ID badge, blacked out. Only one thing was clear. His name. Redacted. Eliza Merriweather, he said, voice flat, neutral. Or shall I say, echo? She didn't answer. He stepped inside. Each footfall erased a little more light from the room. You've seen too much, he said, and remembered even more. He extended a gloved hand. I'm here to bring you back. Eliza stared at him and whispered, You're not real. The redacted man tilted his head. No, Eliza. I'm what remains when reality is erased. Suddenly, every file on the walls burst into flame. The typewriter melted. The mirror cracked, and the redacted man began to fade. But not before he said, This war didn't end. It was archived. Chapter 7. The Archive, beneath London. Smoke curled from the typewriter's remains. The redacted man vanished into dust. Eliza stood alone, but the room was no longer a room. The walls had fallen away. Behind them, stairs. Stone, worn, leading downward, and carved into the wall above, Archive 0, active sites only. She descended without hesitation. Each step felt older than the last, and colder. When she reached the bottom, silence. Then the hum of deep power. A steel door awaited her. No lock, just a hand scanner. She placed her palm on the plate. It accepted. The door opened. Inside, an endless corridor of vaults. No books. No paper. Just memories, suspended in glass. Each orb shimmered with scenes. People talking. Missions playing out. Truths being rewritten. Above them, metal plaques. Each one dated. Each one stamped confidential, unverified. And then, she saw it. Her own orb. Glowing faintly red. Flickering. Unstable. She reached for it, and a whisper filled the chamber. Editing live memory file. Agent Echo in progress. Chapter 8. The memory that fights back. Eliza touched the orb. Warmth surged through her hand. Then cold. Then pain. Images flooded her mind too fast to hold. Vienna. The war room. Francis. Helena's fall. The mirror. But something was wrong. They were being rearranged. Redacted. Rewritten. She tried to pull away, but her hand was stuck. A mechanical voice echoed from above. Memory overwrite in progress. Retention protocols at 63%. Compliance status unstable. Her vision blurred. Her thoughts weren't hers. She tried to speak, But someone else's words came out. I was never there. I never saw the file. There is no echo. No! She screamed inside. She dug deeper into her own memory. The one untouched. The one buried. A child's voice. A man's laugh. A cold promise whispered in the rain. They'll forget you, before they ever forgive you. She gritted her teeth, and forced her hand forward, deeper into the orb. Not to lose the memory, but to own it. The orb cracked. A flash of light burst from the center, and the entire chamber shook. The memory didn't collapse. It fought back. Chapter 9. The name the files erased. The chamber lights flickered. Sparks flew from the broken orb, and then the silence broke. Not from Eliza, from the vaults. A low hum grew into a whisper. Hundreds of voices, fragmented, overlapping, each one saying a name. Merrick, Ambrose, Hinesworth, Eliza, and then one name rose above them all. Avery. Eliza froze. It echoed again. Avery. Not her, but someone she once knew. Someone erased. She stumbled back and looked at the label below the shattered orb. Where her name once was, now appeared Subject, Avery. Status, Purged. Role, Voice Originator. Risk level, Classified. A flash of memory surged through her. Uninvited. A figure standing at a train station, offering her a book. No title. No author. Just one phrase carved into the spine. Everything you forget, I will remember. Her knees weakened. Eliza whispered into the darkness. He was the first listener, and from the shadows, a new voice answered. He was also the first to disobey. Chapter 10. The voice that still speaks. The vault lights dimmed. The broken orb dissolved into dust, but the name Avery remained, glowing faintly in the air. Eliza turned toward the voice. A man stepped forward, face hidden in the shadows. No uniform, no badge, just presence. You remembered him, he said softly. That means the seal is broken. Eliza studied him. There was recognition, but not clarity. Are you one of them? She asked. A listener? He smiled gently. I was something before that. Before the game. Before the silence had rules. She stepped closer. You're Avery? He shook his head. No, Avery is gone, but his voice remains. In you. The chamber began to shift. Walls folding inward. Vaults retracting into darkness. Why are you showing me this now? Eliza asked. Because you're ready to hear what comes next. She blinked, and the man was gone. Only his voice remained. Go to the room they buried beneath Parliament. Find the tape labeled Operation Carry-On. Play it. You'll hear the voice that ended the war. Eliza stood alone once more, but not silent, because now she had a name, she had a path, and above all, she had a voice. Part 5. The Carry-On Protocol. Chapter 1. The Tape in the Wall. Eliza stood at the edge of Parliament. Not in the halls of debate. Not where the cameras lived. Beneath. Past maintenance tunnels. Beyond abandoned vaults. Down a stairwell, marked C4 Decommissioned. She found it. A door covered in concrete. Except for one thing. A bronze plate. Tarnished. Barely legible. Carillon. Activated only by sound. She removed her gloves. Pressed her palm flat against the surface. Nothing. Then she did what no spy is ever trained to do. She sang. Just a note. Low. From memory. A lullaby she had once heard in Vienna. The night before the mission. The wall vibrated. Stone peeled back. A hollow cavity appeared. And inside it, a reel-to-reel tape, labeled Operation Carry On, and a handwritten warning, "Do not play in public." She pocketed it, and as the wall resealed, a tone echoed softly behind her, like a bell. One note, and the whisper that followed, "If you hear the last chime, it's already too late." Chapter 2. The Note That Wasn't Music. Eliza didn't return home. She went to a safe flat in Southbank. Windowless, soundproofed, forgotten. The kind of place spies don't list. But remember, in case of endings. She placed the reel-to-reel tape on the player, took a deep breath, and pressed play. Nothing happened at first. Thinner single note. High. Soft. Like the first chime of a bell before a ceremony. But it didn't echo. It lingered, clung to the walls, to her skin, to her mind. She blinked, and the room changed. Same furniture, same shadows, but the color was gone. Everything gray, muted, and the tape kept playing. A voice began to speak, but not in words, in triggers. Anchor, listener, Vienna, spiral, Avery, spiral, spiral, spiral. Her pulse quickened. She reached to stop the tape, but her hand didn't move. She couldn't remember how to lift it. The voice whispered again. Protocol carry on. Erasure through resonance. Truth collapses when spoken in perfect pitch. And in that moment, Eliza understood. This wasn't just a recording. It was a weapon. Chapter 3. The Bell That Broke Memory. The voice faded, but the note remained. Not in the air. In her. Eliza staggered back from the reel-to-reel, heartbeat pounding out of rhythm. Then, the chime returned. Louder. And with it, a memory she didn't recognize. A man in uniform. Not Francis. Not Avery. Different. He held a child in one arm, a gun in the other, standing in a village square, and saying, "This is how silence begins." The image vanished. Eliza collapsed against the wall. Who was the man? Was that her father? No. Impossible. She never knew his name. Or had it been erased? The note pulsed again, sharper this time. A second memory followed. This one, she remembered. Vienna. 1943. Snow. A suitcase full of blank files. And her own voice saying, "We don't have to lie if no one remembers." She screamed, covered her ears. But the note was inside her skull. And then, the tape clicked. It had reached its end. But something else had started. The light in the safe house changed. And from the corner of the room, a shadow stood up. "Hello, Echo," it said. "You played the bell. Now they know where you are." Chapter 4. The Listener Who Never Left. Eliza didn't move. Neither did the shadow. It stood tall, still, composed, wearing no uniform, no insignia, just silence. "You've been listening all this time," she said. The figure nodded. "That is what we do." She scanned the room for exits. There were none she could reach. The tape was still warm in the player. "You let me play it," she whispered. "No," the listener replied. "You were allowed. That is different." He stepped forward, features still obscured not by darkness, but by something else. Like he was a shadow that never cast light. "Protocol carry on is not sound," he said. "It's structure, tone, memory reformation, through harmonic anchoring." She narrowed her eyes. "Is that what happened to Avery?" The listener paused, then said. Avery tried to rewrite the silence. Eliza's voice cracked. "What did he find?" The listener answered without hesitation. The original voice. Silence again. This time, not empty. Heavy. And when Eliza looked back, the listener was gone. But in his place, a second tape. No label, just a symbol burned into the casing. A bell, split down the middle. Chapter 5. The Voice That Was Buried Twice. The new tape was smaller, dusty. It didn't hum with danger like the first one. It was quiet. Eliza hesitated, then slid it into the second deck. Pressed play. This time, no music. Just static. And then, a voice. Tired. Weathered. But clear. If you're hearing this, it means I failed. It was Avery. Eliza sat down slowly. The voice continued. They buried me once in Vienna, then again in the files. But this tape is my voice untouched. She felt tears sting. But the voice wasn't finished. There is no Carillon Protocol. That's just the name they gave it, so no one would listen twice. The real name is Project Silence Keeper. It doesn't erase memory. It rewrites who gets to tell it. A click, then static. Then another voice cut in. This one metallic, official, unauthorized breach detected. Archive code Echo 73. Termination team en route. The tape jammed. The light in the room flickered red, and Eliza whispered to herself, they weren't listening. They were waiting. Chapter 6. The exit that wasn't marked. Alarms didn't ring. They pulsed. A dull thudding like a heartbeat. Red lights began strobing through the flat. But the sound wasn't electronic. It was musical, like a bell tolling in reverse. Eliza grabbed both tapes. The door wouldn't open. The listener had sealed it. She scanned the room for options. Ventilation? No. Window? Bricked. Only one place left. The floor. She pulled the rug away. Concrete. But she remembered a detail from a file she once glimpsed in Berlin. Classified safe houses. One unmarked egress. Accessible only through acoustic cue. She took a breath. Then whistled. A single off-key note. It shouldn't have meant anything. But the concrete shimmered. And then split. A narrow hatch appeared. She dropped through. Below, a maintenance shaft. No light. No ladder. Only echoes. And a smell dust and gunpowder. From above, a muffled voice. Echo has departed the frame. Begin noise sweep. Eliza crawled deeper into the dark, holding both tapes like relics. Behind her, the hatch resealed. In front of her, a new sound. Not mechanical. Not musical. Just breathing. Chapter 7. The Man Who Forgot to Die. The breathing grew louder. Eliza's palms sweated around the tapes. Her voice caught in her throat. Then, a match flared. Soft orange glow revealed a narrow chamber, and a man sitting on a crate, wrapped in wool, eyes milky with age. But he smiled, like he'd been expecting her. You came through the music, he rasped. Good. That's how they can't track you. Eliza stayed back. You're not with them? The old man chuckled. No one's with them, dear. Not even they know who they are anymore. He reached out a shaky hand. Let me guess. Echo? She nodded, slowly. He tapped his temple. They tried to erase me once. Forgot I kept the first copy. Eliza stepped forward. Who are you? He smiled again, and whispered, I'm Avery. She gasped. But your voice on the tape. I recorded it decades ago, he said. Then they buried me, under 6 identities and 1 forgotten war. He looked at the tapes she held. You have them both? She nodded. He exhaled with relief. Then you can end it? Eliza leaned in. How? Avery smiled faintly. You don't destroy the protocol. You play the one thing they fear. The original silence. Chapter 8. The silence that isn't empty. Avery opened a rusted metal case at his feet. Inside, a reel, unmarked, unlabeled, and utterly still. Even the dust refused to settle on it. He touched it like glass. This is what they built everything to avoid. Eliza stared. But it's silent? He nodded. Exactly. It's the only recording ever made of pure memory. Not sound, not words. Just the moment before, thought. He handed it to her. It was warm. Too warm. Almost like it pulsed. Play it in the old bell chamber, he whispered. The one beneath the tower. She knew the place. A sealed acoustics lab once used during the war. Abandoned. Forgotten. But its resonance chamber was perfect. Why there? She asked. Avery met her eyes. Because only in silence can the truth finally echo. A hum filled the tunnel. Low. Familiar. Her pursuers had found the trail. Avery pressed something into her hand. A key, with a spiral engraved. Go, he said. I've already stayed longer than memory allows. Eliza hesitated, then climbed toward the exit hatch. As the silence in her hand began to vibrate. Chapter 9. The chamber with no sound. The tower's sublevels hadn't been touched in decades. Dust blanketed everything. The air was thick, not with age, but with anticipation. Eliza moved silently. She held the reel close. Each step down the spiral staircase made the silence louder. The door to the resonance chamber loomed ahead. Steel. Lead-lined. No handle. Just a slot shaped like the key Avery gave her. She inserted it. A soft click. Then, nothing. No hiss. No creak. No echo. The door opened. Into pure absence. Inside, a domed room. Perfect geometry. No reflections. No shadows. It didn't feel like standing in a room. It felt like standing outside of sound. She set the reel onto the player at the center, paused, and pressed play. No music. No voice. Just a stillness. So absolute. It became form. It filled the chamber like water. Eliza closed her eyes. And suddenly, memories returned. But not hers. Dozens. Hundreds. Spilling in. People she never met. Places she'd never seen. Pain she'd never felt, but knew was real. And then, a single word formed in her mind. Rewrite. Chapter 10. The rewrite that wasn't authorized. The reel stopped spinning, but the silence stayed. Inside the chamber, Eliza no longer felt like herself. She felt like a vessel. For stories. For loss. For truths too dangerous to archive. Then, a tone cracked through the quiet. Not from the tape. From the room itself. A resonance. Perfectly dissonant. It shook the walls. And then, the ceiling opened. A projection appeared. Lines of classified data scrolled in the air. Redacted files, unredacting themselves. Photos. Audio. Maps. Each marked Carillon erased subject. Echo variant memory. Avery. Eliza cross-anchoring detected. Eliza stepped back. Her own name blinked in red. Rewrite detected. Authorization none. Status unforgiven. Sirens rose from far above. Not in warning. In rage. The protocol had detected her defiance. And now, it would respond. But she didn't run. Not this time. She placed the original tape back in the case. Walked calmly out of the chamber. Because, in the silence, she had remembered who she was. And more importantly, what she was meant to break. Tommy's brow furrowed. You want us to become her? Fenton nodded. You're not chasing a woman. You're stepping into the trail she left behind. Her last days, her contacts, the things she nearly uncovered and the attention she attracted. We want you to retrace her steps, to become a ghost that walks where she walked." Tuppence gave a dry laugh. "So we're bait." "Precisely," said Fenton without hesitation. Tommy leaned forward. "And what do we get if we agree?" Fenton's gaze didn't waver. "The satisfaction of preventing a complete breach of British intelligence, and a chance to settle an old score." At that, he placed one final item on the table, a name written on aged parchment. A name neither Tommy nor Tuppence had seen in 15 years. Rudolph von Helden. Tuppence exhaled slowly. "He's dead." "No," Fenton replied. "He just got promoted." Von Helden had been their nemesis in the early days, a master of manipulation, a strategist buried deep in the intelligence machine of the Reich. Their last encounter with him had ended in a train explosion and a fake obituary. Apparently, neither had been real. Fenton stood. "We're short on time. You leave tomorrow at 600. You'll take the cover of Mr. and Mrs. Wendell, recently inherited owners of the Grey Swan Guesthouse. You'll rebuild her cover, walk her steps, and find who's pulling the strings." He started toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Tommy?" "Yes?" "If either of you dies out there, I'll deny ever knowing your names." He left without waiting for a response. Tommy looked at Tuppence. She sipped her cold tea and said, "Well, it's never dull with you." He gave a crooked smile. "You love me for it." By noon the next day, the Beresfords were no longer themselves. Their names were now Mr. and Mrs. Wendell, semi-retired hoteliers from Southampton. They had inherited the Grey Swan Guesthouse, a seaside retreat nestled in the quiet North Norfolk coast, known more for gulls than gossip. Except this one burned to the ground 2 nights ago. "Quite the inheritance," Tuppence muttered as she adjusted the scarf over her hair, glancing through the cracked window of the railway carriage. Tommy, seated opposite her, adjusted his reading glasses, real for once. He flipped through a dossier Fenton had left them with. Floor plans of the Grey Swan, the last known ledger entries, a guest list, all incomplete, all scrubbed. It says here the guest house had 10 rooms, but only 6 were in use. 4 were always kept reserved. "For who?" she asked. He looked up. "That's the question." The train whistle blew, and the countryside rolled into view. Mist blanketed the green fields like a shroud. Smoke from a passing engine faded into the air like ghosts exhaled. When they arrived at the nearest village, Lomarsh by Sea, it was nearly dusk. The wind from the coast had a bite, and the sky had turned the colour of bruised fruit. A man in a fisherman's cap offered them a ride in his wagon, and they accepted. He didn't speak until they were halfway down the dirt road. "Strangers shouldn't stay long here," he said. Tuppence turned toward him. "Why is that?" The man didn't meet her eyes. "Bad winds. Worse memories. That house Grey Swan wasn't made for sleeping. It was made for watching." Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a glance. The wagon came to a stop at the ruins. Once grand, the Grey Swan now stood as a blackened skeleton, its sign hanging by one chain, creaking softly. A scorched spiral staircase twisted toward nothing. Windows were gone. Ash coated everything like dust in a tomb. Yet something still lived there, a presence. Footprints in the mud. A kettle, unburned, still sitting on a stone shelf. "Someone's been here," Tommy said. Tuppence stepped carefully into what had been the lobby. Charred floorboards groaned underfoot. She stopped before a half-melted wall safe. It had been forced open, but not recently. The hinges were rusted, the door ajar. She reached in. Inside was a single object, untouched by flame. A child's toy soldier, brass, polished. Its uniform was wrong, not British, not even German. Russian. "Tommy," she whispered. "We're not alone in this." Tommy took the toy soldier gently from Tuppence's hand. He turned it over, inspecting the smooth base. A small engraving was etched there, not initials, not numbers, but a symbol. A star with 8 points, each ending in a different language, character Latin, Cyrillic, Hebrew, and ones even he didn't recognize. He frowned. "This isn't a toy. It's a message." Tuppence nodded. "A cipher? Or a mark? A calling card?" He slipped it into his coat, just as movement flickered in the corner of his vision. Both turned quickly, too late. The figure had already vanished behind the crumbled garden wall. They dashed outside, but the tracks led nowhere. The damp grass was untouched, save for a small scrap of red cloth caught on a rusted nail. Tommy pocketed it. That night, they slept, or rather rested, in the upper loft of a nearby barn, using straw and army blankets Fenton had hidden earlier. The wind howled like a warning. Every creak of the old wood sounded like approaching footsteps. At 3:17 a.m., someone whistled a familiar tune outside. Just a few bars. Off-key. Daisy Bell. It was a code from 1922, the low-alert distress whistle, used only when capture was near. Tuppence gripped Tommy's hand under the blanket. "That's not coincidence." "No," Tommy whispered, reaching for his revolver. "It's a trap." At first light, they returned to the ruins. Waiting for them on the scorched doorstep was a letter, folded precisely, pressed under a stone. It read, "Wendell, you are not the first to come searching. You won't be the last to disappear. Stop chasing shadows, or join them. N. No address, no blood, no fingerprints. Just fear." Tuppence folded it silently. "So, Anne is still alive." Tommy nodded grimly. "And watching us." The letter burned a hole in Tommy's coat pocket, the entire walk back to the village. Every face they passed felt like it lingered too long. Every closed window shutter was a curtain drawn on secrets. And the air, though still carried tension like static before a storm. Back in Lomarsh by Sea, they checked into the Seabreeze Inn, a modest place with lace curtains and a landlady who talked too much about her dead cat and not enough about her living guests. Tuppence took mental note of the mismatched chairs in the lounge, and the odd oil painting of a shipwreck hung perfectly straight, despite the wall's unevenness. As they settled into their room, Tommy whispered, "Someone else is using the guest book." She looked confused. "In the lobby," he said, pulling out the ledger he'd palmed on the way up. "New names supposedly from the past week, but 2 of them are aliases used by MI5 field agents. One of them died in 37. Tuppence's eyes narrowed. Someone's maintaining the illusion that the Grey Swan was still hosting guests even after the fire. They studied the list of names. One stood out. C. Langridge. A name Tommy hadn't seen since Madrid. A traitor, presumed. Executed. "Let's find out who signed in under his name," he said. They started with the post office, a hub of gossip disguised as public service. Mrs. Elkins, the postmistress, was a widow in her 50s, with a fondness for rhubarb sweets and an encyclopedic memory for visitors. Langridge? Oh, yes, she said brightly. Stayed just a week before that dreadful fire. Quiet fellow, always reading foreign newspapers, accented English not from here. Tommy kept his tone light. Did he receive much post? A few envelopes. All from Dover. No return address, just initials. M.C. Tuppence glanced at Tommy. M.C., a designation once used internally to mark missions compromised. They thanked Mrs. Elkins and stepped outside. "What are we thinking?" Tuppence asked. Tommy adjusted his scarf against the wind. "That N and M are still in play, and we've walked straight into their theatre." She paused. "You think they're watching us now?" He nodded once, slowly, and across the street, behind a slowly moving bicycle, a figure turned just slightly enough for Tommy to see. A glint of 8-pointed silver on a coat lapel. The same symbol as on the toy soldier. Tommy reacted instantly. He darted across the cobbled street, weaving between 2 parked delivery vans, but the figure with the silver emblem was already gone and vanished around the corner like mist. By the time he reached the alley, it was empty. Only the smell of tobacco lingered foreign, bitter, Eastern European. A cigarette was still smouldering in the gutter, Russian make. Tommy crouched and pocketed the stub, scanning the rooftops. Tuppence joined him, breath quick, Lost him? For now. But something deeper than frustration was creeping in. This wasn't random. They weren't being hunted for what they knew. They were being drawn in deliberately, like moths to an invisible flame. Back at the inn, their room had been searched. Not ransacked, no. The search was too clean. Their suitcases were in the same spot, their toiletries untouched. But Tommy noticed the telltale signs, a crease in his shaving towel that hadn't been there before, and Tuppence's blouse folded slightly differently than she had left it. "They're not looking for money," she murmured. "No, they're looking for what Fenton gave us." Tommy checked the floorboard near the window where he had hidden the toy soldier and the red scrap of cloth. Still there, but beside it now sat something new. A black pawn from a chess set. Wooden, hand-carved, and not theirs. He held it up to the light. No markings. But it was a message. "We're in a game," he said, "and we've just been moved." That night, Tommy and Tuppence didn't sleep. Instead, they watched from their second-floor window as shadows passed by below. Some walked with purpose, others drifted as if waiting to be seen. And then at 2:13 a.m., a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. Then silence. They drew their weapons. Another knock. Softer. Tommy opened the door quickly, aiming low. But there was no one there. Only an envelope on the floor. Inside, a single sheet. "You're not the only ones pretending to be Wendell. Room 4. Sea Breeze Inn. Midnight tomorrow. Come alone." Tuppence stared at the note. "Room 4? She glanced at the hallway. Their room was room 4. Tommy stared at the note, then at the brass plaque on their own door. Room 4. "What do they mean? We're Wendell. We're in room 4, Tuppence whispered. He turned the note over, but it was blank. No watermark, no trace of a typewriter handwritten in block letters with charcoal pencil, the kind used in field communication. "It's a warning," Tommy said finally. "Or a challenge. Either way, it means someone else has claimed our identity or wants us to know they can." The next 24 hours moved like clockwork laced with dread. They spent the day watching, listening. Mrs. Elkin said room 4 had been empty for 2 weeks before their arrival. Yet, Tuppence distinctly remembered seeing a figure watching them from the hallway mirror the first night. A trick of the light, she had thought. Not anymore. Tommy pulled records from the local housing office. Nothing in the file mentioned the Wendells. In fact, the real owners of the Grey Swan had died in a car crash in 1938. No heirs. No transfer of property. Nothing. Meaning Fenton's inheritance was fabricated. And worse, the Wendell identity may not have been theirs alone. Midnight came like a thief. Tommy stood by the door, revolver drawn. Tuppence had moved into the shadows of the armoire, blade tucked in her sleeve. They waited. Footsteps came slowly, purposefully, and stopped outside room 4. Then silence. A key clicked in the lock. The handle turned. The door creaked open. A silhouette entered short, slight. A woman? Tommy stepped forward fast, weapon raised. "Don't move!" The figure froze, hands half lifted. "You're early," she said. Her voice was soft, northern accent, measured. Tuppence stepped forward. "Who are you?" The woman turned slightly enough for the lamplight to catch her face. Young, mid-20s, green eyes, and a face they recognized immediately. Catherine Lee Fenton's missing field agent. The woman whose death they had been sent to investigate. Except she wasn't dead. Tommy's grip tightened. "You're supposed to be dead." Catherine Lee gave a small, humorless smile. "That's the point, Mr. Beresford. I arranged for that assumption, and clearly, someone else is undoing my good work." Tuppence circled her warily. "Why show yourself now?" "Because you're here. Which means something has gone terribly wrong at the top." She moved slowly toward the edge of the room and leaned against the desk. "You're not just here for me, are you?" Tommy lowered the revolver slightly but didn't holster it. "We came because someone in this town is posing as N or M, or both." Catherine's smile faded. Then you're already compromised, she said softly. Because N has been dead for months. A long silence. Tuppence folded her arms. Explain, Catherine paced. Last winter I was embedded in a Soviet listening post operation outside Dover. My mission was to track a courier ring using coded messages embedded in ration manifests. She glanced up. I traced them to the Grey Swan. Not to the owners, to the guests. The same 4 rooms always reserved. Tommy nodded. We know. What were they used for? Dead drops, courier exchanges. But more than that, it was a message center. Before the fire, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. She took a breath. Killed. Tuppence's eyes narrowed. Why? Catherine shrugged slightly. Because N was a fanatic, too loud, too loyal to Moscow. M was different, pragmatic, efficient, more dangerous. Tommy's mouth felt dry. You heard them speak? Catherine hesitated. Not directly, but I recorded snippets. I passed them to Fenton. Days later, he stopped replying. The next week, my flat was raided. I fled. Faked my death. Hid here, under your identity. Tuppence stepped back. That explains the ledger. The Wendells. Catherine nodded. I needed a cover. Fenton was supposed to keep me buried until this was over. But it's not over, Tommy said quietly. It's only just begun. The 3 of them sat in silence for a long while, the only sound the distant hush of the waves battering Lomarsh's stony shore. Tuppence finally broke the silence. You said M is more dangerous. Why? Catherine's gaze didn't waver. Because M doesn't act out of ideology. M acts for power. And the network they've built doesn't end at Lomarsh. It snakes through command posts, MI5 liaisons, even radio monitoring stations across the coast. Tommy looked grim. You're saying M is embedded in British intelligence? Catherine nodded slowly. I've spent the last 2 months collecting fragments, call signs, intercepted codes, patterns in wireless activity. But someone's already ahead of me. My contact in Hastings was found drowned in a dry well. Another turned up dead at Paddington Station. Shot twice but called a suicide. Tuppence exhaled sharply. And now you've surfaced, which means M will know. I'm counting on it, Catherine replied. That night, Tommy couldn't sleep. He sat at the desk while Tuppence pretended to rest, penning encrypted fragments of their findings into the margins of The Wind in the Willows, an old habit from their early days. At 4:23 a.m., the innkeeper's dog barked wildly. 10 seconds later, a gunshot rang out. They bolted from the room. In the hallway below, the door to room 3 was ajar. Smoke drifted in lazy spirals. Inside, a man slumped in an armchair, chest soaked in blood. A pistol lay by his side. No note. No struggle. But Tuppence pointed to the table. A chessboard. Mid-game. A single move just played. Black Queen to E5. Tommy's heart sank. Fenton, he whispered. They stepped closer. It was him. Dead. Mouth frozen mid-word. But under his wrist, just barely visible, a torn piece of paper. Not suicide. M equals. The rest was missing. Outside, the dawn rose cold and silent over Lomarsh. And somewhere behind one of those grey seaside windows, a master of shadows watched them back. Part 2. The Room Without Shadows. Word count progress. Beginning. The train to London shuddered forward at dawn, rocking gently as the fog outside thickened like a curtain refusing to lift. Tommy stared through the glass, not really seeing the wet fields roll by. Fenton was gone. And in his death, he had confirmed the one thing they feared most. M equals a name, a face withheld by fate. The rest of the scrap had been torn away, soaked in blood. Whoever had silenced Fenton had done so with surgical precision, a warning cloaked in misdirection. Suicide staged like theatre. But the chess move had been real. Deliberate, Queen to E5. Fenton's last play. Beside him, Tuppence sat with arms crossed, but her posture rigid. She wasn't sleeping. She was calculating. They weren't headed back to headquarters. They were headed to a bookshop. Let me know if you'd like me to continue writing Part 2 in full now, or if you'd prefer it as a downloadable file, chapter-by-chapter narration, or integrated audiobook script format. The bookshop on Carnaby Street had no name on the front, just a brass bell that jingled in a sharp, specific way, when the door opened once for visitors, twice if you were expected. Tommy rang it twice. The man behind the counter barely looked up. His sleeves were rolled up, showing a faded tattoo of a Royal Navy anchor blurred by time. "Back room," he muttered. They passed through rows of spy novels and dusty encyclopedias until a curtain of velvet parted to reveal a much smaller door with reinforced hinges. A camera above blinked once in green. Click. The lock turned by itself. Inside, the room smelled faintly of old wood, iodine, and tobacco. A single woman sat at a desk made from salvaged warplane parts olive skin, sharp eyes behind thick spectacles, hair pulled tight beneath a black beret. Beatrix Langley, MI5's most reclusive analyst. The only person trusted with the archive of all unsolved wartime operations, codenamed Vault N. Tommy and Tuppence had only met her once nearly 8 years ago, and even then through a one-way mirror. But she remembered. "You brought me a Queen's move," she said before they even spoke. Tommy slid the note across the desk. "Fenton died in room 3 of the Grey Swan. A gunshot. This was left on the board." Langley looked at it in silence. Then to them, "Queen to F-Eve is a message," she said. "It's the only forced move in the Berlin defense of the Nimzovich Gambit." "Meaning?" Tuppence asked. "Meaning someone's playing both sides. M.E.F is not just embedded. M.E.F is likely sitting at the very table directing strategy against Britain from within MI5. Tommy leaned forward. "We need names." Langley didn't blink. "Names? I'll give you a building." She pulled out a file from a locked drawer. A list of 7 officers, all worked out of a location known only by its code name, the Room Without Shadows. Tuppence frowned. "What is it? A cell?" "A listening station," Langley replied. "Or that's what it pretends to be. Floor 3, Aldwych Station. Closed to the public, sealed since 1939. No maps, no oversight." Tommy ran his finger along the names. 3 he recognized, 4 he didn't. Then one stood out not because it was familiar, but because it was struck through with red ink. "Catherine Lee." Tuppence gasped. "She's already compromised?" "No," Langley said. "She was removed from the list by an anonymous hand 2 days ago, and whoever removed her is still inside." Tommy straightened. "Then we need to go in." Langley looked grave. "If you do, you'll have to go without official sanction. You'll be ghosts. No backup. No rescue." Tuppence met her eyes. "We've done it before." Langley nodded once, then handed them a card. It was blank, but as the lamplight shifted, a number appeared in thermochromic ink. 1342. Tuppence read it aloud. "Basement. Left. Code room 2. Langley's eyes narrowed. "That's where the file on M last transmitted from before all signals went dead. The Aldwych Underground Station had been closed to the public since the early days of the Blitz. Most Londoners believed it had been repurposed for storage, or sealed off entirely. In truth, it had become one of the most secretive nodes in Britain's wartime intelligence architecture, its 3rd sub-level housing rooms that officially didn't exist. Tommy and Tuppence arrived just after midnight. They came through a delivery access tunnel beneath Kingsway, armed with stolen credentials and Langley's thermal card. A rusted lift shaft took them halfway down before they climbed the rest by hand. Tuppence's fingers were scraped bloody by the time they reached the bottom. A thick metal door stood in the darkness. No markings, just a keyhole and a faint smell of oil and stone. Tommy inserted the card. It clicked once, then slowly opened inward. Beyond it, a corridor, lit faintly by emergency bulbs. Pipes hissed overhead like whispering serpents. Dust hung in the air like powdered ash. Room 13.4. 2 was at the far end. The door ajar. Tuppence took point, blade in hand. They entered and froze. The room was empty. No operators, no machines, no lights, no hum of power. Just a desk, a shattered teacup, and on the far wall, written in block letters with what looked like charcoal, "The shadow has a voice." Tommy stared. That's a code phrase. From the Warsaw broadcast. Tuppence nodded. 1939. Right before the German invasion. But it was only ever used once. Which means someone here knew it. Someone who listened when they shouldn't have. She stepped forward, and her foot landed on a wire. Click. A beep sounded. Then silence. Tommy's eyes widened. Trap. The room exploded. Dust. Pain. A ringing in the ears like the world had been muted. Tommy woke in darkness, half buried under twisted metal. Tuppence was next to him, unconscious but breathing. They were alive. But the door behind them was gone, collapsed in rubble. And on the far side of the debris, someone stood watching. A man in a dark coat, holding a black umbrella. Not walking, just standing, watching. Then he turned and vanished into the corridor without a sound. Tommy coughed hard, blood in his mouth. Every movement screamed pain. But he forced himself upright and pulled Tuppence from the wreckage. Her eyes fluttered open as he dragged her behind what remained of a filing cabinet, now twisted into a makeshift shield. She groaned. Was that supposed to be subtle? Tommy gave a weak laugh. If that was a warning, it was damn well received. They sat in silence for a moment, listening. No footsteps, no alarm, no reinforcements. It was as if the place had been entirely abandoned except for the man with the umbrella. Tuppence whispered, "We need to know who that was." Tommy nodded, rising slowly. And why he watched. Instead of finishing the job, they picked through the rubble, searching for any clue. Then Tuppence found something. A metal ID badge, charred around the edges, but still legible. V. Callahan. Security clearance. Chimera. Department. Redacted. Tommy blinked. Callahan. Wasn't he on the list Langley gave us? Tuppence checked the folded paper she had tucked in her coat. Yes. Number 3. Tommy stared at the badge, then at the twisted corridor. Then either Callahan tried to stop M, or he was used. Outside Aldwych Station, rain was falling. London's dawn sky bled from charcoal to ash as the Beresfords emerged from the underground, bruised, dirty, but alive. They couldn't go back to Langley. Not yet. Anyone who had access to that level of clearance could tap into her safe house too. Instead, they did what they had always done best. They vanished. 3 nights later, in a cramped basement beneath a jazz club in Camden, Tommy met with the only person left who might know what chimera really meant. Sir Alaric Pendry. Once a top analyst for the War Office, Pendry had vanished, after a scandal involving falsified dossiers and one vanished operative. He was older now, eyes like storm glass, fingers ink-stained, and paranoid. "I shouldn't even talk to you," he hissed. "You're ghosts now, marked. You know that?" Tommy nodded. "That's why we need to know what chimera is." Pendry's expression darkened. "You don't want to, but you're already drowning, aren't you?" Tuppence said, "We need to find M. Everything points to this." Pendry leaned forward. His voice dropped. "Chimera isn't a person. It's a project." Tommy froze. Pendry went on. "Started in 1940. The idea was simple. Train a new breed of double agents. Not just defectors, constructs. Men and women raised, educated, and embedded with false loyalties. Entire lives built from scratch, No true side. Only assignment. Tuppence said quietly, "Like puppets." Pendry looked at them both. Like shadows with voices. The phrase echoed in Tuppence's mind. Shadows with voices. Pendry's hand trembled slightly as he poured himself a measure of gin from a dusty bottle. Chimera wasn't supposed to be operational. Too unstable. Too dangerous. But someone within the service reactivated it covertly. Tommy leaned forward. "Who oversaw the program?" Pendry hesitated, then said a name they hadn't heard in years. "Brigadier Harrington." Tuppence inhaled sharply. "He vanished after Dieppe." "No," Pendry said. "He was disappeared. Reassigned, wiped from records. His name was scrubbed from everything except internal codebooks, and no whiz-back. Or at least, his blueprint is." Tommy's voice was low. "Is he M?" Pendry shook his head. "I don't think so. Harrington wasn't a spy. He was a craftsman. He made tools. Someone else, someone with authority, is using those tools now." Tuppence frowned. "A puppet master." Pendry nodded grimly. "And from the way you two look, I'd wager they already know you're coming." Later that night, in a small rented room above a bakery in East Finchley, Tuppence couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, watching the rain blur the street lamps into long, watery ghosts. She thought of Catherine Lee, of the list, of the way Fenton had died mid-game, mid-sentence, and she thought of the face in the corridor. Who watches instead of killing? Only someone confident, or conflicted, or both. She turned back to the table, where Tommy was scribbling notes across a city map. A new network was forming a thread connecting Lomarsh, Aldwych, Chimera, Harrington, and now, a name Pendry had whispered before they left. Gravesend. A town on the eastern coast. Pop. 7. 400. Military port. Decommissioned. But according to Pendry, it had gone dark 2 weeks ago. No outbound communications. No updated intelligence. No patrol confirmations. Gravesend was one of the original test sites for Chimera, Pendry had said. If you want to find the roots of this, go there, but don't expect to leave clean. Tuppence placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "We leave at dawn." He nodded, and without looking up said, "One more thing." "What?" He circled a block in red on the map. Langley's signal was traced again. Tuppence tensed. "Where?" Tommy met her eyes. "Gravesend."